Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 233 based on novel. So let's start. First ancestor tumbled and crashed into the depths of this vast space. He vanished into the fog. What followed next was a light shining out from the fog. It was the pupil light from his eyes. The last time they fought, he had once used his divine eyes to nail Qin Mu to the wall of Hall of Human Emperors, nearly snapping Qin Mu's waist into half. The third eye on the heart of Qin Mu's brows was tightly shut, and didn't open. Countless formation markings swirled in his eyes and two beams of light shot out, clashing towards the gaze. The gaze of first ancestor Human Emperor shone over and both of their pupil divine arts clashed. Incomparably intense light burst forth. It was like two small suns that had shone dozens of miles in all directions, driving away the fog. First ancestor's divine art was still more exquisite than Qin Mu's, as the divine light from his eyes immediately suppressed his nine heavens' divine eyes. First ancestor Human Emperor roared and his hair fluttered in the wind. He raised both of his hands and star clouds appeared in the sky. Countless huge meteors were about to fall from the sky. The third eye on the heart of Qin Mu's brows opened up. He said with a soft voice, "This is the second time I have unleashed my full power." Suddenly, the divine treasures of his God Path and Devil Path revolved around each other. The vital chi of the God Path and the Devil Path flowed together, fusing together under his third eye. His cultivation had literally doubled. He heard a hum as his gaze just crushed first ancestor Human Emperor's pupil divine art straight away. That pair of gaze struck first ancestor Human Emperor and nailed him to the ground ruthlessly. First ancestor's divine art also crumbled immediately as the star clouds in the sky vanished. The meteors falling from the sky also vanished. Qin Mu's gaze nailed him firmly to the ground, causing his bones to give off snapping sounds. Suddenly, the vital chi around first ancestor Human Emperor transformed into countless runes, turning into a formation. Teleportation divine art. Divine light pulled back into Qin Mu's eyes. The runes around his body jumped around, quickly calculating the location where first ancestor Human Emperor was teleporting to. The vital chi in his hand transformed into an incomparably fine sword light. Countless sword lights gathered and transformed into a treasured sword in his hand. Swinging the sword like wind, he precisely blocked the Mudra skill of first ancestor Human Emperor, who was about to appear. First ancestor's figure finally appeared. With one Mudra as heaven and another as earth, he was the Lord of heaven and earth. In terms of attainments in Mudra skills, he even surpassed third ancestor Human Emperor's yin-yang heaven flipping hands. Third ancestor's yin-yang heaven flipping hands was actually an inspiration from first ancestor. However, third ancestor took the path of yin and yang, the 9 great creeds, 19 steps in length and breadth, 361 footwork, and 361 Mudra skills. Back then, during third ancestor Human Emperor's generation, third ancestor Human Emperor was invincible with 19 steps in all directions. Smashing the unbeatable legend of third ancestor Human Emperor was his disciple, fourth ancestor Human Emperor. He created his own 10 crossings of law technique, and had beaten the old man up miserably. Meanwhile, first ancestor Human Emperor's technique was a level higher. With Heaven Mudra and Earth Mudra, he was respected between heaven and earth. Third ancestor Human Emperor could only achieve 19 steps in all directions, while his Mudra stretched throughout heaven and earth. Yet his Mudra skill had met Qin Mu's sword. Qin Mu didn't make use of his sword pellet. Fighting first ancestor Human Emperor this time, he didn't use any spirit weapons. He even threw his Daotai sacks on the ground. He wanted to defeat this army deserter of founding emperor era with his true abilities. He wanted to defeat this person, who had destroyed a lifetime's hard work of these human emperors. He wanted to step on this scoundrel, who had insulted the techniques of past human emperors. He wanted to destroy all his glory and step on his pride. His sword light was an unrivaled sword, it was simply beyond compare. With a jolt of his hand, he executed Calamity of High Emperor. Boundless calamity air connected heaven and earth to split the sky and rend the earth. This was Village Chief's sword skill. As the previous human emperor, Village Chief's attainments in sword skill surpassed the past human emperors by leaps. In Fengdu, Village Chief got ganged up on, but not a single human emperor dared to fight him one-on-one. That was because Village Chief had caught up to the reform in his old age, so his sword skill had improved one more step. If it was a one-on-one fight, other than First Ancestor, no one was a match for him. In Qin Mu's hands, he had incorporated the 18th sword form into Calamity of High Emperor, having a total of 18 basic sword moves. Compared to Village Chief's sword skill, he still couldn't achieve perfection. However, this sword skill was even more powerful in his hands. His magic power was incomparably dense. Not to mention the other divine arts practitioners on the same realm, there weren't much great experts on celestial being realm that could even surpass him. Qin Mu's magic power burst forth. His sword light sliced the power of the Heaven Mudra and Earth Mudra, breaking the legend of First Ancestor being invincible under heaven and earth. First Ancestor Human Emperor had no choice but to change his move. There was clearly a flaw in Qin Mu's sword skill, but First Ancestor Human Emperor couldn't break in. That was because Qin Mu's magic power was too dense, and he could use his terrifying vital qi to make up for his openings. As he wielded a sword in one hand, his body moved like a dragon. No matter how strong First Ancestor Human Emperor's Mudra skill was, Qin Mu just broke them all with Calamity of High Emperor. He was even too lazy to transform his move. Pull me out, pull me out. In front of Hall of Human Emperors, Human Emperor Yishan struggled to crawl out from the ground. He wanted to go into Hall of Human Emperors to see the situation. Human Emperor Qi Kang behind him frantically said, "I got trapped by First Ancestor's Mudra skill." Human Emperor Lan Po and the rest struggled to get up. Once they were back on their feet, they surrounded Human Emperor Qi Kang and struck the land surrounding him. Finally, they broke First Ancestor's Mudra skill together and saved him. With the Human Emperors holding on to each other, they finally passed through the Hall of Human Emperors that had been smashed through. As soon as the Human Emperors arrived at the back of the hall, all of them had a dazed look as they saw two figures moving quickly in the fog. First Ancestor Human Emperor had a Mudra as heaven, and there was a power like the heaven was crashing down. With another Mudra as earth, the ground was trembling and the mountains were shaking. His body was like a pillar that supported heaven and earth from falling apart. This kind of Mudra skill was a marvelous divine art that could only be created after reaching extremely high attainments in Mudra entering the path. First Ancestor Human Emperor's Mudra skill contained his frame of mind. In the final years of founding Emperor era, the heaven was falling and the earth was rending. Founding Emperor Celestial Heavens was approaching a crisis. He was also a person who had experienced that sorrowful era and wanted to save the entire skyscraper with his strength alone. His heaven and earth Mudra skills brought out an intense feeling that was beyond comparison within him, letting heaven and earth run amok. However, as the pillar that supported heaven and earth, he would always be steadfastly standing between them. This was probably what he was thinking in his heart. He was a person that had experienced that tragic era. That era was deeply imprinted in his Mudra skill. His Mudra skill could borrow the power of heaven falling. Likewise, it could also borrow the power of earth rending. Therefore, his power was supreme and boundless. This was the reason why all the past human emperors couldn't be on a par with him. Even though the past human emperors all held heavy responsibilities, They had never experienced a tragic time, like first ancestor human emperor did. They didn't have to witness the collapse of a majestic celestial heavens, witness his clansmen and comrades dying miserably, and witness the passage of time burying those glorious years. Only having this kind of experience, could he have this kind of frame of mind. Only then, could he create such a technique and divine art. On the other hand, the past human emperors didn't have this kind of experience and frame of mind, thus the techniques and divine arts they had created were naturally inferior. The human emperors met each other's eyes, their hearts full of wonder and shock. Even when first ancestor was facing off Qin Mu, he had no choice but to stay in a defensive position. He was truly in a disadvantageous position. Even though Qin Mu's sword skill still had the shadows of village chief, Dao Sex Dao sword, an eternal peace imperial preceptor, his sword skill already had the momentum of jumping out of village chief, Dao sword, and imperial preceptor's influences. The mood that was in his sword skill was different from the mood that was in first ancestor's Mudra skill. His sword skills didn't have village chief's melancholy of remembering the olden times, Dao sword's ingenious way of calculation, and eternal peace imperial preceptor's wisdom of thinking about the whole world and planning strategies. However, his sword skill was like a blazing fire sweeping through the prairie. His sword skill was like the spring wind brushing across the desolate plains that were filled with vigor and fighting spirit. His sword skill seemed to be trying to cut down all devil miasma and degenerates. It had a great resolution to get rid of the old and support the new. Like a blazing fire on boiling oil, it had the great willpower to work ambitiously for prosperity. His sword skill seemed to have another kind of mind-blowing resolution. It was the frame of mind brought from another era. It was a completely different era from the era that was full of disasters and sorrow. It had the drive to improve, sweeping the entire world with reform using superior fighting spirit. First ancestor human emperor and Qin Mu were people from different eras. Each had a different kind of divine arts. One was a Mudra skill, while the other one was a sword skill. Both of them were separately imprinted with the traces of different eras. Strictly speaking, it was hard to say which was higher and which was lower based on the meaning that had been established. However, based on their frame of mind, one showed acute determination in pushing forward with high fighting spirit, while the other was sunk in remembering his past defeat. From this perspective, victory and defeat were clearly determined. Not only that, the most terrifying point was that Qin Mu's power was simply too dense. He suppressed first ancestor human emperor's Mudra skill, and just destroyed that powerful Mudra skill like they were decayed branches. Qin Mu fought more and more fiercely. As he slashed over with his sword, he had this great urge to sever first ancestor human emperor, this pillar that supported heaven and earth. He forced first ancestor to have no choice but to execute his teleportation divine art repeatedly. His truly the overlord body, human emperor Qi Kang muttered. Second ancestor said dejectedly, there's truly an overlord body in this world. I originally thought human emperor Qin had only relied on hard work to reach where he is. Never did I truly expect him to be the overlord body of the legends. This vital Qi, it's simply too crazy. The other human emperors also nodded their heads. If he wasn't an overlord body, it was truly difficult to explain the sight they were seeing. When all of them ganged up on first ancestor, they suffered a miserable defeat. First ancestor human emperor had knocked them down on the same realm. Now, on the same realm, Qin Mu was actually pressuring and beating up first ancestor. Only an overlord body could achieve such a feat, right? Su Muzha, that brat, really deserves those beatings. Human Emperor Qi Kang sighed ruefully. The other human emperors also shared the same sentiments. First ancestor still has a finishing blow he had not used. Second ancestor suddenly said, he executed it once before. I have seen it. It's 3 extremely terrifying Mudra skills. Fourth ancestor hurriedly said, "How terrifying are they? The heaven will fall and the earth will rend, 3 forms of overturning heaven." Second ancestor looked at the fight between Qin Mu and first ancestor. He could only see numerous sword wounds on first ancestor that were inflicted by Qin Mu. For Qin Mu to have injured him to this extent, he should be proud. 3 forms of overturning heaven is his divine art that had entered the path. I wanted to learn it once, but these 3 Mudra skills contained strong thoughts of self-destruction. I'm afraid that after learning it, I would die after executing all 3 moves. Second ancestor let out a shaky breath and muttered under his breath, "I hope he doesn't use it." Right at this moment, heaven and earth changed. The firmament cracked open, and heavenly stars fell like rain. The sky was scorched red-hot, and the ground fissured as volcanoes rose everywhere. All kinds of natural disasters came pouring in. First ancestor finally couldn't hold himself back, and used the first form of 3 forms of overturning heaven. At this moment, Qin Mu pointed at the heart of his brows. A beam of sword light shot out from his third eye. 10 miles of sword light shone brilliantly as it flashed by in an instant, nailing first ancestor human emperor, before his 3 forms of overturning heaven could even burst forth with its power. First ancestor was blown backward with the sword for 10 miles, and got nailed on a huge mountain. Ha! Qin Mu bellowed in anger and his fists swung forward, as he smashed furiously towards first ancestor like a hurricane. It wasn't known how many punches he had thrown in that instant. Terrifying force from the fists accumulated together, and transformed into a destructive force to strike first ancestor human emperor, who was nailed on the mountain. "Stop!" Human Emperor Qi Kang and the rest jumped out and cried out in shock. They tried to catch up to Qin Mu's fist force, but it was already too late. Rumble. That mountain was shattered by the terrifying force, but all of the force had only landed around first ancestor human emperor, sparing him. The entire mountain turned into a stone pillar, with first ancestor human emperor still hanging on it. Qin Mu turned around and walked out of Hall of Human Emperors. He didn't bother to look at first ancestor, who was on the stone pillar. He said with a calm face, "You can insult the past human emperors, but I'm not you. I won't insult you." First ancestor human emperor clutched the sword wound on his chest. He suddenly cried out, "Don't go. I shall first impart 3 forms of overturning heaven to you." Qin Mu walked to the front of Hall of Human Emperors. He bent over and picked up his sword pellet and Daotai axe. He turned his body slightly and chuckled. "Not interested. It's not worth my time." First ancestor human emperor fell into a daze. He struggled free from the stone pillar. Qin Mu walked through the gate of Hall of Human Emperors with wide steps, his figure vanishing as the gate closed. First ancestor was in a slight daze. It seemed as though he still hasn't recovered from the series of attacks Qin Mu had given him. However, second ancestor and the rest knew that he was acting like that because Qin Mu didn't want to learn his technique and divine arts. Simply put, first ancestor was wondering at Qin Mu's rejection. His original intention was to motivate Qin Mu, and let him discover more of his potential before teaching his own technique and divine arts to him. Qin Mu was indeed motivated by him, and risked his life to transfer himself into Supreme Emperor Heaven. He went through hardships and escaped death several times. Qin Mu's technique finally entered the path, and this allowed him to have the ability to be a match for him on the same realm. If it was anyone else, they would all find it difficult to return from Supreme Emperor Heaven alive. The dangers within were simply beyond anyone's imagination. However, after Qin Mu had invested so much, he only used a phrase "not worth my time" to reject his technique and divine arts. Was he in disdain of learning his techniques and divine arts? Or was he in disdain of how he had conducted himself and handled affairs? Maybe it was both. The past human emperors looked at each other before finally looking at second ancestor. They all stretched their fingers out and poked him in the waist. Second ancestor, human emperor, walked forward unwillingly. Without giving a damn, he said, "Old man, bah. You look even younger than me." "Master, human emperor Qin has his own pride. If you didn't destroy our blood, sweat, and tears, and crushed my skeleton and tombstone, he wouldn't have acted that way to you. Stop being full of remorse. If he doesn't want to learn, you can teach them to me." First ancestor, human emperor, gave him a look and shook his head. "I gave you 800 years, yet you could never learn it. I have already lost hope for you. I feel human emperor Qin, who has the overlord body, would at most take a few months to learn it." Second ancestor, human emperor, turned and walked back furiously. "How insulting. I'm not going to persuade him anymore. Anyone who likes to bother with him can go. With this attitude, he deserves to be beaten to death." The other human emperors looked at one another in dismay. First ancestor walked over. His earlier bewilderment and disappointment were all wiped away. "This is Jade Brightness Palace, one of the 36 palaces. Even though you are all human emperors, you have only come to its surroundings, which is the area of Hall of Human Emperors. Let me bring you all to the true Jade Brightness Palace. Follow me." All of the human emperors were puzzled. He was depressed a short while ago, and now he was going to bring them to Jade Brightness Palace. They really didn't know what first ancestor human emperor was thinking. However, first ancestor human emperor wasn't wrong. Even though they had frequently come to Hall of Human Emperors when they were still alive, they didn't know much about it. They could feel that the space of Hall of Human Emperors wasn't just limited to this land that they were seeing, but every time they tried to walk into the fog to explore, they would be brought back to the front of Hall of Human Emperors as they walked. Even if they flew or ran at full speed, it was the same result every single time. Hall of Human Emperors would just appear in front of them. No matter which direction they headed, it was always a loop. During that time, they realized that someone had used great magic power to fold up the space surrounding Hall of Human Emperors. That person didn't want to let others discover the secrets of Hall of Human Emperors, and this person could only be First Ancestor Human Emperor. First Ancestor Human Emperor definitely had his own reason for trying to hide Jade Brightness Palace. So what was the reason for him to open up the palace now? First Ancestor Human Emperor brought them to move forward. Jade Brightness Palace is not a place of high authority, however. It was also an extremely sacred place in founding Emperor Celestial Heavens. This is a place of education, and there are 4 heavenly teachers that took appointments here. Back then, when the calamity first broke out, I was seeking knowledge here. Second Ancestor thought for a moment and said, "Does one of the heavenly teachers have the appearance of a woodcutter?" Heavenly Saint Cult's founding master thinks that he is a saint. First Ancestor Human Emperor nodded. He is one of them. Back then, when the calamity broke out, he left Jade Brightness Palace to go to the front lines and develop strategies for the battle. After a change had happened in Jade Brightness Palace, he thought I had died. When he realized that I didn't join the battle and had escaped instead, he had ignored me ever since. A change happened in Jade Brightness Palace. All of the human emperors were curious. Third Ancestor Human Emperor asked, "First Ancestor, what was the change that had happened?" First Ancestor Human Emperor ignored his question. He continued leading them forward. Suddenly, the fog faded away and a magnificent sight appeared before their eyes. A community of celestial palaces was in front of them. There was row upon row of buildings every 5 steps, and row upon row of pavilions every 10 steps. Scenes of springtime were everywhere. The bright and beautiful buildings were like 16-year-old beauties, and the winding corridors of the palaces meandered like ribbons. The scent of books and papers wafted out from the doors, and they seemed to hear faint sounds of scholars reciting. The human emperors were bewildered. There seemed to be no signs of wars at all. There was not even a hint of destruction by any divine art. The palaces, buildings, pavilions, and pagodas were all incomparably fresh, as though they were recently constructed. There were no signs of corrosion over time. This was something that was impossible. Founding Emperor Celestial Heavens was already destroyed, and traces of war could also be seen outside Jade Brightness Palace. There were burnt lands and countless graves of gods that had died in battle, so how was this place untouched by the flames of war? First Ancestor Human Emperor didn't say a word. He led them forward and they passed by a huge hall. There were numerous praying mats in the hall, and young men and women were currently sitting inside. They raised their heads while looking forward, as though they were listening to a lecture. The hearts of all of the human emperors trembled violently. These young men and women looked vivid and lifelike, but they could see that they had already died for countless years. In front of the hall was a god that had the bearing of a scholar. He had one hand raised and a smile on his face, as though he was currently giving a lecture about the marvel of divine arts to the youths below him. This god was also a corpse and there was no breath from him at all. The corporeal bodies are not decomposed. What's going on? Human Emperor Qi Keng asked in a low and hoarse voice. No one replied to him. First Ancestor Human Emperor continued to walk forward and they followed him in a hurry. On the journey, they saw even stranger sights. Around the corner, they saw a little girl that had 2 ponytails, and she was fixed in a state of running. She was chasing after a black-colored divine hound, and that black hound seemed very mischievous. It led the little girl to chase it and even had a naughty glint in its eyes. The little girl had a smile on her face, as though she was clapping her hands and saying something. However, this little girl and this divine hound were both frozen in the past. They had both died in that instant, and their final actions had been preserved right before they died. All of the human emperors looked around as they became more and more shocked. Not far away, there was a god that had the appearance of a scholar, and in front of him stood a young maiden. The maiden was carrying several books in her arms while looking up to the scholar, as though she was asking the teacher some difficult question. There were also a few youths that were cultivating divine arts in the courtyard. 2 of the youths were currently in a duel. They had athletic postures and mudras were being formed under their hands. It seemed like they were executing a kind of Mudra divine art. Beside them, a few youths stood. They were smiling and had their heads together, as though they were discussing who was stronger. All of the human emperors pulled back their gazes and suppressed the tremors in their hearts. They continued to follow First Ancestor. The more they saw, the more shocked they became. The time in this place seemed to have stopped. There was no sound at all. Everyone here seemed to be in suspended animation, maintaining their final action right before they died. Silence. Indescribable silence. It was a deadly silence that suffocated them. Those who had entered Jade Brightness Palace to learn are all outstanding talents among the younger generation of the celestial heavens. When the calamity broke out, the next generation of founding emperor era were all destroyed in an instant. First Ancestor Human Emperor said with a blank expression, the person who had attacked this place had used the divine arts of Yudu. Only a single divine art erased all the hope of founding emperor era. I had escaped by luck and I didn't even dare to look back. I fled in a panic. I thought my Tao heart was strong enough and no one could make me feel fear. However, when I saw so many friends, so many youths and gods dying, I crumbled there and then. All of the human emperors were silent. When facing such an abrupt change that was inconceivable, it was hard for anyone not to crumble. I escaped. I was at a loss. I felt panic and fear like a dog that had lost my family. First Ancestor Human Emperor said in a harsh tone, I encountered the army of the celestial heavens that had come to rescue us, but I was completely frightened. I didn't join them and I continued running. When I came back to my senses, I had nowhere to escape. Where could I go? Therefore, I turned back and found my way over, then. His face became slightly contorted, the pain in his heart couldn't be imagined. He took a few heavy breaths. Then I saw their corpses. I was supposed to be fighting with them. I was supposed to die here with them. But I escaped. I lived on, but they are forever buried here. His shoulders trembled as he tried to suppress his tears. I lingered here, and there was no more reason for me to live. I wanted to die with them. At that moment, I saw numerous races that were escaping for their lives. There were some divine arts practitioners that were helping a lot of ordinary people to evacuate. So I took them in and protected them, until I could find a place for them to settle down. I searched for a long time. Finally, I found the place where the celestial heavens had landed. They were grateful to me, and these people, that were exhausted from running, used the last of their treasures to refine a human emperor's seal. They made a vow that every generation would remember what I've done, and will never dare, or want to betray. However, they didn't know that I wasn't the human emperor that they wanted. I was just an army deserter that was scared out of my wits. He laughed at himself and shook his head. The circumstances created a hero, but I didn't want to become a hero. I didn't want to become a human emperor. They pushed me up to this position. Second Ancestor said, so afterwards, when you took me in as your disciple and threw the human emperor's seal to me, it's because you think you aren't worthy of this human emperor's seal. First Ancestor Human Emperor nodded his head. He came to the front of a 9-storied building and looked up at it. This is Jade Brightness Pavilion. There are numerous techniques and divine arts of founding emperor era that are better than Supreme Emperor Heavens. All of you can go in and learn whatever you want. He then sat on the stone steps of Jade Brightness Pavilion with a sorrowful look. He looked at the familiar faces of people who had long died in front of Jade Brightness Pavilion. Even though 20,000 years had passed, he could still call out their names. Second Ancestor Human Emperor, and the rest didn't walk into Jade Brightness Pavilion. Instead, they looked at him. Suddenly, Second Ancestor asked in a bitter voice, Master, since you have better techniques and divine arts, why didn't you impart them to me? Why didn't you impart them to the people of the world? Do you think those people that you had saved were all ordinary people? Poor people that are not worthy of the techniques here. He couldn't help questioning him loudly as he sneered. That's right, you are the human emperor that's revered by all of the races. We are just poor and ordinary people that you have saved. We can't be compared to your noble bloodline. You are a prince that's high above, we aren't worthy of your technique. If you wanted to impart, you would have done so 20,000 years ago, so why didn't you? He couldn't hold back the bitterness in his heart. He raised his voice. Did you know that after you left, I fought high heavens alone? I struggled to fight, and almost died a few times in their hands. But all you have given me is that shitty seal. I held on, because I felt I was the human emperor, and I should be doing something for humanity. You could have taught me. You could have taught me. First Ancestor was stupefied. Second Ancestor pointed at the past human emperors and said furiously, these people, they also inherited that shitty seal of yours. They gave up their dreams for you, to fight their entire lives and put all their effort into this. A lot of them never married, never had children, never had descendants, and all of that is because they were afraid the identity of human emperor would implicate their descendants. They were afraid that having a romance would hold them back from the responsibilities of a human emperor. But what about you? You've hidden yourself away your entire life and hid for 20,000 years. you have let us down. First ancestor Human Emperor's body trembled. He shook his head. I can't impart. There's only a few people left from founding Emperor era. If I impart to you, all of you will become a threat, and will be wiped out. He raised his head, his eyes filling with tears. If I imparted to you, I will be harming all of you. I can't. Second ancestor was stunned. After a while, he said bitterly, now that we're already dead and only our primordial spirits are left, what's the point of you imparting them to us now? First ancestor buried his face in his elbows. He said in a hoarse voice, there are a lot of corporeal bodies left in Jade Brightness Palace. They had died too fast, so their corporeal bodies are preserved. You, all of you can just possess them and revive yourselves. Human Emperor Qin needs you. Only he is worthy of becoming the Human Emperor. Go. Go. Don't let me see you all. Second ancestor, and the rest of the past human emperors fell into a daze. All of a sudden, second ancestor knelt down. Teacher. The other human emperors also knelt down, and when they raised their heads, first ancestor human emperor had covered his face and left. Will first ancestor be back? Yi Shan asked. Second ancestor had heavy emotions in his heart as he said, he might have seen hope on human Emperor Qin, but he doesn't want to see us possess his old friends. I don't know if he will be back. If he comes back and saw our faces, it might remind him of his old friends. When Qin Mu walked out of Hall of Human Emperors, the sky was dark. The stars above him twinkled as he let out a pent-up breath. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he found a huge rock and sat on it. He fell into a daze. Even though he had finally let out his anger by beating up first ancestor human emperor, there was still something gnawing away in his mind. Maybe if I beat him up once more, it can undo this thing that's gnawing at me. Even the orbit of the stars in this fake sky is slightly messed up. The gods controlling the aspect of the celestial bodies are becoming sloppier and sloppier. He stared with his eyes wide open. He looked at the messed up aspect of the celestial bodies as the eastern sky slowly lightened up. After a moment, the stars in the sky scattered in all directions like running horses. He thought to himself, Sun Sovereign controls the sun in the aspect of celestial bodies, but now that he was slain by Grandpa Butcher of our village, there is no one left to control the sun in the sky. The other gods must be panicking and scrambling. The stars in the sky were messy for a short while. When the sun rose up in the east, the sunlight covered up the messy aspect of the celestial bodies, so they no longer looked messed up. Qin Mu quietly sat on the rock and sneered at the stars that had just been concealed. When the sun rose up from the horizon, its path was also slightly crooked. Because of this, it looked like a kite that was being flown, swaying left and right from time to time. This kind of situation became apparent after the death of Sun Sovereign. The other gods that were controlling the sun now weren't too familiar with regards to how to control the sun. As a result, more mistakes could be spotted. Sun Sovereign went to Supreme Emperor Heaven with Qi Jiui to find Qin Mu, only to meet Butcher, his old nemesis. As a result, he was slain by Butcher. After his death, there was no god that could control the sun formation in eternal pieces aspect of the celestial bodies. The sun should have been taken over by other gods, but since they weren't trained, mistakes were everywhere. Eternal pieces aspect of the celestial bodies was formed by formations. It was the same for the sun, moon, and stars. The gods that were in charge of these formations definitely had their own responsibilities. So for them to suddenly take over Sun Sovereign's star diagram naturally made them flustered, and they couldn't handle the task immediately. Qin Mu saw the sun gradually rising in the sky. It finally stabilized, but it was still swaying left and right. The sunlight radiated in all directions to light up the southern border and South Sea in a variety of colors that were charming and dazzling. Suddenly, the gate of Hall of Human Emperors appeared once again, and first ancestor Human Emperor walked out from inside. Qin Mu turned his head and looked at him before turning his head back to continue looking at the sunrise. First ancestor Human Emperor hesitated for a moment. He didn't leave. Instead, he walked to the bottom of the rock and sat down. First ancestor Human Emperor stared at the sun for a while and cried out, "This sun, it's unbearable to look at." Qin Mu originally wanted to keep a straight face and ignore him, but he got amused by what he heard. "Just bear with it. That sun sovereign who controls the formation of this sun had been slain by my grandpa Butcher." "I see." First ancestor Human Emperor said, "I've met that sun sovereign before. When the aspect of eternal peace's celestial bodies was covered up, I saw them unfolding a screen across the sky and hung up the sun, moon, and the stars. It has also been hard on him to have faked it for 20,000 years. He looked at Qin Mu and his tone dropped lower. "I'm sorry." Qin Mu was slightly stunned and he said with a smile, "Why are you apologizing to me? I've beaten you up, so I should be the one to apologize to you." First ancestor Human Emperor shook his head. "I had originally wanted to be your teacher, and teach you all of my abilities and comprehension. But I've thought things through after you left. I have already harmed so many human emperors to have a lonely and bitter life, I couldn't do the same to you too. You should choose your own path. I was wrong for wanting to make you walk my path." Qin Mu bit his lips as he pressed them together into a thin line. After a short while, he opened up his arms and stretched his back. "I hated you very much and wanted to beat you to death. But I can only defeat you on the same realm, and I can't kill you. Besides, after beating you up this time, the hatred in my heart is no longer as intense." His expression was calm and he said insipidly, "Maybe you wanted to test me, maybe you wanted to encourage me, to make me work harder and surpass you. Whatever the case, I hold your methods in contempt." First ancestor was slightly stunned and cried out, "You saw through it. I'm not stupid." Qin Mu focused his gaze on the sun and said softly, "However, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't use such a dumb and bad method to encourage the juniors. I won't even destroy the hard work of my family and destroy the corpses of my family. But you did all those. You are indeed an army deserter. I hold your character in contempt, so I chose not to learn your technique and divine arts." First ancestor Human Emperor was silent. After a moment, he asked, "Who are the people that had taught you?" "They have taught you well." Qin Mu was in high spirits, as his face revealed a look of respect. "They are the best people in the world, the kindest people in the world. They are wise, upright, and have broad minds. As a human, they surpassed you 100 to 1,000 times. Do you know Village Chief? He is also the previous Human Emperor, the one that got beaten up by Grandmaster Qi Kang and the rest of the ancestors every day. He is the number one elder in our village. I admire his knowledge the most. If it wasn't for him and his discovery that I have the Overlord body, I might still be herding cows in great ruins at this moment. There's also Granny Sai, the most beautiful and kindest woman in the village. She was the one who had picked me up and raised me." This video will end here.